Good morning, somebody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And we are here live, coffee and chat with Rev Bruce. I want to make sure that we do this and do this right. Let me grab my coffee right here just for a moment and we'll get started. All right. So we want to start today by talking about faith-based challenges and a faith-based challenge for community change. And I'm coming at you with this simply based upon not only my experience as a minister, but also my experience in social action, particularly with my experience through CDF Freedom Schools. So let's take this for what it is and how it is and what it means to be engaged in faith-based activity and to be engaged in faith-based activities that are pushing towards community change. And this is going to be an initial broad-based attempt to get started and then get moving into a direction to where I give some more practical pieces, some more pragmatic pieces on how to engage as a faith-based community to take this challenge and bring about community change. So let's go ahead and roll into this. And boom. When we start talking about faith-based challenges for community change is a long-term objective, right? And so we can't get into this and think from the perspective of it's all going to change overnight. It's just showing up one time, doing one thing, and then boom, the issues are eradicated, the problems are eliminated. It doesn't work like that. And so when we talk about faith-based community change, we're talking about doing something on a continuum for a long term, and that's to bring about a broad scale societal change. We talk about attacking hunger. We talk about dealing with the AIDS and HIV. We talk about dealing with things that are going to take time to eradicate or even eliminate, and those require us to work with a long-term objective on a continuum, right? The little developments over time make a difference in how we're able to implement change. And so in this context of a local community change can take many different forms and it can occur on many different levels. And so let's step back and see, we can create a program, but then there can still be policies and procedures in place that make access difficult for people. I worked in hunger outreach, health education, and one of the things that were still issues were people's ability to access fresh fruits and vegetables. That's why a lot of the programs like Cal Fresh and that process, even for the application, became more of an advocacy approach than just a direct outreach approach. Here, you need to sign up for this program that's available. So it deals with policy, procedure, different levels, as well as programs. Where are people getting access to fresh fruits and vegetables? Where are people actually getting access to apply for CalFresh benefits and things of that nature? So when we look at that, that's when we talk about community change. And then faith communities and faith-based communities, faith-based organizations that stem from faith communities, those play a key role in bringing about community change. Those are change agents that can be involved in community change, who should be involved in community change, if I could say it another way. By their very nature, faith-based organizations are to actively engage in bringing about changes within their local communities, and that's based upon simply the tenets of their own faith. And we can see that here when we talk about, doesn't matter if you're going to a synagogue, doesn't matter if you're going to a mosque, a temple or a church for prayer and worship, that's not the end all of your faith. Your faith should carry out beyond the place of worship. You understand what I mean? The worship occurs in that place, but the work occurs outside of the place, right? So we have a big difference between where the worship occurs, right? You understand what I'm saying? And the work occurs outside of the place, okay? And so there's two different things right there, right? You've got worship, you've got work, and then how do those both fit in with where we're working with people? You know, how do those fit in with where we're serving God and serving God's people, serving the people who would benefit best from God? So this is something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about how we serve within our faith and within our local communities. And so worship is not the end all of it. And our work is part of what we're supposed to do in expressing and living out our faith. And so keep that in mind. Those occur on different levels. Those occur in different places, and they're not one and the same. And I can explain that a little bit more as we go forward. In the Jewish faith, they call it a mitzvah, right? And if you really want to take it into consideration, mitzvah is derived from a Hebrew word. And that Hebrew word has its own meaning. That Hebrew word is basically, in short order, that Hebrew word basically means commandment. But what it's taken to literally mean the commandment is to do good deeds. You're doing God's commandments. You're living out God's commandments. You're living as the Lord has chosen you in order to do. You're supposed to do the things that God has laid out before you and address the things that God has put before your eyes. And that's where mitzvah comes from. In the Islamic faith, they talk about something called hasanat, right? And hasanat, that's also someone's name, but that's also good deeds. In the Judeo-Christian faith, we call it good works or even benevolence. We talk about how we serve people, how we support people, how we provide things for people. And when we do that by being there for people. We do that by sharing with people. We do that by being ready, for what we call good works. And good works are those things that bring about good, not for us, but for others. And when we talk about doing good works, here's a video. I'll put it in the chat, right? Here's a video that I did previously for our Bible study that happens during the week. And that happens to be about the readiness for good works. And so the Bible speaks about that. The Bible speaks about us being there, being prepared to do good works. Let's take this from a Christian perspective, right? When I talk about faith-based communities, faith-based organizations, a faith-based challenge, I'm going to speak as a Christian minister. I'm going to speak as one who believes in the power of evangelism, in the power of outreach, in the power of good works. And so where does all that come from? In the Christian faith, look at Isaiah in the opening chapter. Isaiah in the opening chapter gives us not only an indication and an example of what we should do. Isaiah 16 and 17 from chapter 1 says, number one, we need to cleanse ourselves from evilness and wickedness. We need to cleanse ourselves from evil and wickedness. That's verse 16. And then 17 says we need to learn how to do good. And then it goes on to say we need to seek justice for the oppressed, which deals with the cause of the widow, that deals with those that have been mistreated by others and been taken advantage, and those who have been doing the oppression, we need to correct them. And so those are some Old Testament tenets about how we should be geared towards community change, geared towards bringing about change. And so that's part of what we do as believers. But then flip it to the New Testament. Not only does Mark 10:45 say the Son of Man came to serve and not be served, right? That's an example. We're supposed to serve if we're supposed to be like him. Then he also said he came to seek and save those who are lost. He came to bring attention to those who have gone away from the Lord and who are lost, and to actually save them, to redeem them, to reclaim them. And then it also says in Titus, in two different places, Titus 3:1, it says, remind them, talking about the people of God, to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, follow the rules of the land, but to be ready for every good work. Be ready for it. Be there and ready for it. And let our people, Paul, still talking to Titus, learn to devote themselves to good works, so as to help cases of urgent need and not be unfruitful. So think about this. If we're helping cases of urgent need, hunger, homelessness, health disparities, right? Social injustice. If we're helping cases of urgent need, rape victims, women who are in abusive situations with children who need to find a place to stay, and we're providing shelters, things of those nature, right? Things of that nature, displaced people due to the housing crisis, people who are displaced and who are gentrified and put out of where they were renting, now need a place to stay. Where are we to stand in the gap, right? And so when I talk about this, I'm talking about something that I'm actually working along with, just like we're all in development. And as we see different things, our ministry develops. And so part of what I'm working on is based upon some stuff that's happening on the streets, particularly on the streets of San Diego. And that's about standing in the gap, which is a video that, I did earlier on the Bible study that we do on Wednesdays, every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll do a Bible study, live at lunch Bible study. Somebody's at lunch at 9 a.m. And at that point, when we look at this and we say, are we standing in the gap? Are we standing in the gap to provide support for people who are on the streets, for people who are displaced, as I said, for veterans who are experiencing PTSD? Are we standing in the gap for people and doing what we can, not doing what everyone else is doing and duplicating what everyone else is doing? Are we doing what we can? Are we living out our God-given potential, right, to do something for others? And I say this because we look at it and we see that, okay, yeah, I hear you, and we can do the same thing that the Salvation Army is doing. We can do the same thing that the Red Cross is doing. We don't have to do the same thing that everyone is doing. We can do stuff that is different based upon living out, as I said, our God-given potential. Think about it like this. You know that something's going on, and what are you doing about it? You feel something is going on, and what are you doing about it? Look at the situation that happened with Nehemiah in the Bible. Nehemiah actually heard something, hearsay, about what was going on with the situation back in his hometown. And he felt a way about it. He felt a certain way about it. And that compelled him and caused him to have a downcast appearance even before the king he was serving. And the king questioned him about it. And he said, hey, here's what I heard, what's going on. I want to do something about it. My heart is saying I should do something about it. My heart goes out to these people. We call that compassion, right? We call that compassion. And when we talk about compassion, our compassion goes out towards others. Our compassion is something that can push from the inward out towards others through our heart. Our compassion is that Jesus looked upon them, right? And he saw them as sheep without a shepherd, and he had compassion on them. I love it in the New Testament, in the Gospels, when Jesus is dealing with someone who is having a personal struggle with, is this the faith or not? Can I follow you or not? And Jesus looks on this person, and the text says he looks on them and he loves them. He has compassion. He has compassion for this person. And so when we have compassion for someone, that means we are actually having our heart go out towards them. That's what we need. That's what we need going forward in order to meet a faith-based challenge. What are some examples of the faith community taking action? Think about this. We have, as an example, Faith in Action, which used to be a program called PICO, right? PICO. And now it's called Faith in Action. And I'm familiar with them because one of the ministers that mentored me, right, who is definitely still involved with ministry as well as being involved with Southern Baptist through Meridian, which is out here in El Cajon, California, Roland Slade. Roland Slade was one of the reps for PICO in bringing about community change in the El Cajon, East County area of San Diego when I first started getting engaged in community activism and social action. And so he was involved with PICO, which is also known as Faith in Action now. So definitely check them out. I believe their tenets still stand out. Their principles still stand out, and their initiatives and priorities still stand out as an example of what can be done within the faith community that can be helping and serving the local community. And let's be real. The examples that we have here of the faith community taking action go back to slavery, the Quakers and the AME Church, Absalom Jones, Richard Allen. They were involved in what was called the Free African Society, right? The Free African Aid Society, right? They were involved in that. The faith community was involved in the abolitionist anti-slavery movement within the 19th century. Let's be real, HBCUs. Go back to what we talked about during Black History Month on the same thing about how HBCUs originated. Go back to how HBCUs got started, how HBCUs were launched, and how the faith community was involved in that, how the faith community did something with that. Wilberforce was part of an AME effort to educate Black youth. That's how that got started. And so go back to that video. I'll put it in the chat. It's right here. But how HBCUs got started was part of a faith effort, not the state, not even the Freedmen's Bureau, but the faith community got that started long before we even got into a lot of the stuff that we come to know now as the involvement of white philanthropy and the support of Black education. And so look at Dr. Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy engaging in what we would consider both church and community when they put together and led the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. Was King the initial leader? No. King was brought in, but he ended up being one of the leaders, right? Being the pastor at Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery. He was one of the leaders that ended up becoming a voice, an advocate, and one who took action for this boycott. That's part of meeting the challenge. That's part of going back to what we talked about when we talk about immediate needs, about urgent needs, what's going on in dealing with injustice. That's part of it as the faith community. How are we dealing with that? How are we putting out fires, and how are we being there to stand in the gap for people? If we're not being there to stand in the gap for people, what are we really doing with our faith? What are we really doing with our faith, and how are we being inspired to get involved with all of the things that are occurring around us? Are we doing something about it? And so as we talk about it, look at this. Operation Breadbasket. Operation Breadbasket. When we talk about Jesse Jackson and all the things that we've heard about Jesse Jackson, I know I'm somebody, stand up and be counted. Jesse Jackson was involved in getting individuals to become investors in major corporations in order to have influence as shareholders. Jesse Jackson was involved with the Rainbow Coalition that he created. He worked intimately with Reverend Al Sharpton in what we talk about right here, Operation Breadbasket, which was under the SCLC. And this was started in 1962, right? And so think about it. What are we doing? What are we doing with hunger? What are we doing with health? What are we doing with homelessness? What are we doing for veterans? What are we doing for the disenfranchised? What are we doing for the disabled? What are we doing for those who are experiencing PTSD when they come back, as far as wounded warriors? How are we honoring our veterans? How are we honoring our seniors? How are we helping our youth? Not just in intervention. I know plenty of churches host AA and NA meetings, and that's a form of intervention. But what are we doing as far as prevention, right? How are our youth ministries talking about prevention? Are we only teaching abstinence and still wondering why babies are being born to our children out of wedlock, and they're sitting there because the church hasn't given them information? What are we doing? How are we handling that? And how are we still being there to support people? How are we still being there to be an active community involved faith-based operation? That's what's important. What are we doing for those who are being put into a position to where they can no longer be themselves or support themselves based upon being underemployed, a lack of skills? Are we there doing something with, Youth Corps? Are we there working with Urban Corps? Are we there working with California Conservation Corps? Are we working with job skills development? Are we working with education? What are we doing? Are we hosting, college fairs? Are we hosting tutoring that occurs to help children, not only within our church, but within our community, to get the support that they need in order to advance academically? What are we doing as far as citizenship classes? How are we helping those who are foreigners within our own land, those who are dealing with issues related to DACA? What are we doing with the Dreamers? What are we doing with people who have children born in the U.S., but they still don't have paperwork as citizens in the U.S.? What are we doing as the church? Not asking the government, but as the church, as the faith community, what are we doing? And we have to look at that. We have to look at that and understand our issues, right? Our issues may not be the same issues that people are looking to deal with all the time. It may not be the same issues that people are looking to say, hey, the church is there, the church is supportive. Can we change the perspective of people to not just see the church as a building in the community, but as an entity building community? You understand me? That we're not just a building in the community, but that we're actually building community. And community breaks down to together as one. Together as one. That we can see common ground with people. This is not just about evangelizing people. This is not just about proselytizing people. This is not just about, okay, we're going to preach a sermon and we're going to have prayer and then we're going to open it up. And then those who are willing to say yes, we're going to give them a meal. This is not about a message and a meal. This is not about that, the old school missionary approach to feeding folks. This is about being there, about being present, about being proactive. And we're going to continue this in different segments with different videos through FIT, which is Faith Impact Training, part of what we do with LifePath Multimedia. And we're also going to continue this through LifePath Mobile Ministries, which is part of the outreach that we do and the support and service that we do on the streets in the community. We're not just going to be taking action, but we're also going to be talking about how to advocate, how to raise awareness, and also how to hold individuals accountable. We talk a lot about holding people's feet to the fire, and then we end up doing what? We end up seeing what change. Accountability is an ongoing challenge for us as communities, especially where we have injustice, especially where we have iniquity, especially where we do not have things on a level playing field. And so the work is there for us to do the work and continue to work. I hope and pray that you'll be able to continue with us and see more of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do this through LifePath and the multiple aspects of LifePath. But thank you for joining and tuning in. I will definitely hope for you to stay informed and stay involved. Peace and God bless.